Hi everyone, welcome back to dinanddaf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and we are going to be talking about the central role that blood plays in Korbanot. I know that for some people, they may be vegan, they may be vegetarian, they may just feel queasy about the whole thing. They may be subscribers to Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook's famous suggestion that in the future, any third Beit HaMikdash should have only minchot, only flour offerings. And to be honest, that resonates with me very much. Nonetheless, I think it's really important to understand the central role that blood plays in the Tanakhic system of Korbanot, the biblical system of Korbanot. And really, what we're going to do today is in the rabbinic system of Korbanot, meaning in Chazal's understanding of Korbanot through what they say, because it really does play a central role. Now, I want to remind ourselves that when it comes to Korbanot, we're not just talking about meat. We are talking about shchita, the slaughter of an animal, and then Kabbalah, accepting the blood into a receptacle, and then Halakha, bringing the receptacle over to where the blood's going to be sprinkled, and then Zerikat Hadam, the sprinkling of the blood. And the sprinkling of the blood is actually quite important. I know that we try to make these shirim not time specific, but we are about to have Yom Kippur within a few weeks where we are going to talk about the sprinkling of the blood. And in fact, we're going to sing a whole song about it, the sprinkling of the blood up and down, right? Achat ve'achat, right? This is about the sprinkling of the blood. So I want to understand the logic a little bit. And the place where we are taking our cue, just in terms of starting with the topic, is the Gemara in Zevachim on Daf Yud Amud Aleph. Because on Yud Amud Aleph, we have just one of the many examples of how we see that Zerikat Hadam makes a difference. Rabbi Eliezer is talking about the fact that, well, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer in the opening Mishnah had said that just like shchita shelo lishma, slaughtering a korban, not for its purpose, meaning for the purpose of the korban or for the purpose of other owners, just like that was disqualifying for a chatat, it should be disqualifying for an asham. An asham, similar to a chatat, an asham is also for sin. So Rabbi Eliezer says, this one's for sin, that one's for sin. What's the difference? And Rabbi Yeshua says, I'll tell you what the difference is. A chatat, you do zrikat adam on the upper half of the mizbeach. You do the sprinkling of the blood on the upper half of the altar. Whereas for an asham, you do it on the lower half of the altar. So I say to myself, come on, what's the difference? The answer is Zerikat Adam is actually really important. The Rambam describes in his Maaseh Korbanot, or sort of an overview within the Mishnah Torah of the world of Korbanot. He says it's actually Zerikat Adam is done differently based on Chazal. He's basing this on the Gemara, obviously. Zerikat Adam is done differently depending on which type of korban you're giving. So if you're giving an ola or an asham or a shlamim, they have one type of Zerikat Adam. And that Zerikat Adam takes place on the lower half of the altar of the Mizbeach. If you are giving a korban chatat that is going to be eaten by the Kohanim, that has one kind, has a different kind of Zerikat Hadam. That's actually the blood is going to be given at the top half of the Mizbeach. And if you are yet doing another type of korban, namely a chatat that it does not get eaten by the Kohanim, but instead gets fully burnt, that blood actually goes not on the external altar where the other examples went, but on what we call the incense altar that's in the Kodesh, right? Otherwise known as the Heichal, right? And they also may, in certain cases, get thrown on the parochet, like on Yom Kippur, right? So there are a lot of different ways that Zerikat Hadam happens. It clearly matters very much. Now, the Torah itself in Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin tells us Ki nefesh habasar badam hi, the life of the flesh is in the blood. Va'ani netativ lechem al hamizbeach, and I gave it to you, says God, on the altar, lechaper al nafshotechem, in order to gain atonement for your souls. Ki hadam hu banefesh yechaper, because the blood eh, being life actually gives the atonement. So it seems pretty clear that actually it's the Zerikat Hadam that gives the atonement. And the Gemara in Zevachim Kavav Amud Bet actually says, the Amar Kra, the pasuk says, "V'ani nitati lachem al mizbeach lechaper." I gave you blood on the altar to effect atonement. Kivan shehigia dam lemizbeach nitkapru ba'alim. Once the blood reaches the altar, meaning once it's been sprinkled on the altar, kapara has been granted, which essentially means that you might have a situation where the Zerikat Hadam is done, but something goes wrong with the actual meat, the actual fats of the animal going onto the altar, but you get kapara anyway because the Zerikat Hadam was done, right? So the Zerikat Hadam is very, very important. So what is so important about the Zerikat Hadam? By the way, there are other things about the Zerikat Hadam that I included in the on the source sheet here for people who want to look at it. Zerikat Adam, the Gemara back on Daf Dalet Amud Aleph says that Zerikat Adam is unique in the sense that if a non-Kohen does it, they are liable to the death penalty. And Rashi clarifies, yeah, if a non-Kohen, of course, a non-Kohen, the only thing they're allowed to do is shchita, right? The only thing they're allowed to do is the slaughter. They're not allowed to do the Kabbalah, the acceptance of the blood into a receptacle, and they're not allowed to do the Halakha. They're not allowed to do bringing it to the mizbeach, but it's Zerika. It's specifically putting the sprinkling of the blood onto the mizbeach, that if they do it, they actually are liable for death, for the death penalty. So clearly, there's something important about this Zerikat Hadam. So I want to give us a few different approaches to what is this about, the centrality of blood, the centrality of blood on the altar. So the first, most straightforward, is basically that this is a substitute for human sacrifice, right? Think Akedah Yitzchak. God does not want human sacrifice, but we do deserve some punishment. So there's a proxy going on. And this is what the Ramban offers us at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra. It says, V'yizrok hadam al mizbeach keneged damo benafsho. A person, or really the Kohen on your behalf, right, throws the blood onto the mizbeach, sprinkles the blood onto the altar, as a proxy to one's own blood. כדי שיחשוב אדם בעשותו כל אלה, כי חטא לאלוקיו בגופו ובנפשו. So that a person will realize through this whole process that they have sinned before God in body and soul. וראוי לו שישפך דמו וישרף גופו. And the truth is, because they sinned, they should really be the one on the altar. They should really be the one punished. If not for God's divine kindness, that God is willing to take a substitute, right? וכיפר הכהן הקורבן הזה, שיהא דמו תחת דמו, נפש תחת נפש, right? And this korban is going to gain atonement for you. It's going to be blood instead of blood, nefesh tachat nefesh, soul instead of soul. Rashi Eivarei HaKorban kineged Rashi Eivarav. Even the different limbs of the animal are kineged, are a proxy for the limbs of the person, and Vahamanot, and the portions that the Kohanim are going to eat. Lachayot behen morei haTorah is to keep alive, to sustain the Torah teachers, namely the Kohanim, sheyitpalelu alav, so that they will pray for this person, that God would not punish them and that God should forgive them. So in other words, the blood in some way it's part of this whole process of, well, wait, I sinned, I did bad. What is my punishment? And the idea is, no, no, no. There's a whole proxy situation here, and this is supposed to help you understand something internally and also hope that the Kohanim will pray for you, right? So this is very interesting because especially when we consider some of the factors of Korbanot, of doing smicha, of actually leaning on the animal, or of doing vidui, next to the animal, doing, giving some sort of confession next to the animal. You could see how this is sort of a kind of a proxy. And I would say that the blood probably is the thing that is most easily seen as shared between humans and animals. Meaning, yes, I see that the Ramban also says, and also your limbs and all. But to be honest, the thing that looks closest about us is our blood, right? Meaning, I don't know that I would be able to tell the difference between human blood and animal blood if I saw them next to each other. Not that I'm looking to see them next to each other, right? So Ramban, it's a substitute for human sacrifice. And when I say it like that, that sounds a little bit more, I don't, maybe that sounds anthropological. Like Akedat Yitzchak explains to us that we don't have human sacrifice and that God doesn't want human sacrifice. And so we do something that fills in. But I think the Ramban is saying something a little bit different. Maybe a better way to say it is, it's like a proxy punishment that's meant to sober us up in some way, right? It's meant to be a sobering kind of proxy. So it's not just substitute for human sacrifice, it's also a sobering experience to see the process of the Korban. So that's one approach. Another approach that I think is really interesting is to really ask ourselves what role blood plays even now, right? Like I'm trying to remember when we were kids, we would, and they would always tell us that what was it called? Like blood sisters, blood brothers, where you would basically prick your finger and somebody else would prick their finger, and you put your fingers together, and it's like a blood oath that we're bound by blood. It sort of gives you a sense of this is this is forever, right? Like this is forever. Now, of course, when AIDS became something that we understood more about, this was actually highly discouraged. I distinctly remember that when people started talking about that, that you shouldn't do that. But I think there is something here about maybe a blood oath, and I want to see where it comes from, that actually blood indicates some sort of permanence to the covenant. So, for example, in Shemot Perek Daled, when we are talking about the Jewish people at Har Sinai, right? We have Vayichtov Moshe Kol Divrei Hashem. Moshe writes down all of God's words. Vayashkim baboker. He gets up early. Vayivan mizbeach tachat achar, and he builds altar under Har Sinai, u'shtem-esrei matzeva l'shnem-esar shtei Israel, with 12 monuments for the 12 tribes. Vayishlach et na'arei b'nei Israel, vaya'alu olot, vayizbechu zvachim, shlamim la'Hashem, parim, and they gave korbanot. Vayikach Moshe chatzi hadam, and Moshe took half of the blood, vayasem ba'aganot, put it in these, kind of bowls. V'chatzi adam zarak al mizbeach, half of it he spilled on the mizbeach. Vayikach sefer habrit, and he took the book of the covenant. Vayikra b'oznei ha'am, read it in front of the people. Vayimru kol asher diber Hashem ne'aseh v'nishma, and they all said, whatever God said, we will do and we will listen. Vayikach Moshe et adam, and then Moshe took the remaining blood that was in that little basin. Vayizrok al, and he does Zerikat hadam, right? He does a throwing of the blood on the people. Vayomer hine dam habrit asher karat Hashem imachem. This, behold, this is the blood of the covenant that God has made with you. Al kol advarim ha'ela, on all of these things. So there's something here that speaks to the seriousness, the permanence, that the use of blood indicates a permanence of covenant. And I think that possibly Zrikat Adam is echoing that every time it happens. And certainly there are particular moments where you probably feel this even more. So, for example, when we're talking about Yom Kippur, Vayikra Tet Zayin, where we talk about what the Kohen Gadol is going to do, right? That the Kohen Gadol is going to do Zrikat Hadam. And what is the purpose of the Zrikat Hadam? V'tiharo v'kidsho mitumot b'nei Yisrael. This is in order to purify and consecrate. I mean, would you have thought that blood is something that would purify, or blood is something that would consecrate? Unless what we're looking at here is some sense of there is a renewal of the covenant, and there's a sense of God is with you till the end, you're with God till the end. The blood reinforces some sense of permanence in a way, right? So that's a second approach. A third approach that I'd like to suggest is something that comes out of the Sefer HaChinuch being a medieval um, mitzvah counting sefer. And in mitzvah 248, where he says it's a negative commandment, shelo le'echol v'lishtot kederach zolel v'sovei, not to eat basically in a piggish manner. And that language is taken, actually, zolel v'sovei is taken from the ben sorer umoreh, right, from the rebellious son. And in that mitzvah, look at what he includes. Shelo laharbot ba'achila ushtiya bimei hana'arut. A person should not eat or drink too much when they're young. B'tna'im haniskarim b'ben sorer umoreh. Under the conditions that are listed regarding the ben sorer umoreh. But as you continue, he says, Vihine askir lecha min hadvarim. I'm going to mention some of the things shepershu lanu zichronam livracha that our rabbis of blessed memory explain to us shenichlalim bilav hazeh, that are included in this negative commandment. Amru zichronam livracha, they said, and by the way, the negative commandment that he's quoting is lo tochlu al hadam. Do not eat literally on the blood. Okay, the rabbis told us sheyesh bo azhara le'ochel mi behema kodem shetetzei nafsha. One thing that it teaches us, lo tochlu al hadam, is you can't eat an animal before it's dead. Right? You don't eat from an animal before it's dead. V'chein lo chel basar kodshim kodem zerikat adam. And you can't eat from the kudshim meat, the consecrated meat, before the blood has been sprinkled on the mizbeach. It would be piggish to eat from the kudshim meat before the dam is sprinkled on the mizbeach. Ukemosha Omru, like they said in Sanhedrin, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Lo tochlu habasar va'adayin dam b'mizrak. Don't eat the meat and the blood is still in the basin. And then he goes on with other examples. Now, I think this is so interesting. And then, by the way, he explains the whole thing. Mitzvah. What's the reason for this mitzvah? Lefisha rov chatot b'nei adam yasu b'sibat ribuy achila ushtiya. Most of people's sins are a result of their eating and drinking too much. Moshe Katuv, as it says, Vayishmani Yeshurun ve'yivat. Yeshurun, the Jewish people, became fattened and kicked, right? Which is basically what happens when we become too arrogant over what we've been able to achieve for ourselves. And we basically kick God out, thinking, well, we've done it on our own. But now he's taking it literally. They ate things that fattened them up, and that's what caused them to be rebellious. But notice what he's playing off of here is not the role of blood as kapara, which was our first dimension with the Ramban, that it replaces the human being. He's not focused here on the role of Zerikat Hadam as some sort of covenantal kiddush or tihur, right? Like some sort of, or what we might call chitui, some sort of purification, covenantal purification model that has the seriousness and the permanence of lifeblood in that way. He's actually focused here on Zerikat Hadam as a matir, Zerikat Hadam as what allows people to eat from the meat, of the Korban because it's uncivilized, it's unseemly, unless you recognize the significance and the power of the dam, of the blood, which is the nefesh, to just go eating like a glutton out of nowhere, right? There's something here about the blood being necessary, a necessary part for the eating that's going to take place later of the korban. And I think that emphasizes the blood here almost as the civilizing element, meaning if you think about what distinguishes Jewish eating from pagan eating in the ancient world, it's we don't eat the blood. So the fact that we have to do a special ritual with the blood as separate from the burning of the fat of the animal says something to our understanding of the blood being the nefesh, being the life force, and us taking a moment to recognize that before just plowing ahead. So I hope this gave people uh, a grounding in why Zerikat Hadam might be so central to the world of Korbanot. Thanks, everyone. Always nice to learn with you.